Matt Barr, who has the largest scientifically verified unaugmented penis in the world. How big is big? Well, his measures 14.4 inches long and 8.5 inches in girth.
From my perspective, he was a very average-looking man to have that element about me, which is objectified, because it's not talked about very much as a topic, and people do think of it as being such a positive thing. And realistically, it comes with those drawbacks. I think I was kind of spoiled. It's a bit like pretty privileged to a degree, where I had a lot of women sort of not really throw themselves at me, but I had a lot of attention from women, should we say, that I wouldn't have had if I was regular.
Welcome back to the Rena Malik MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon. And today I spoke to Matt Barr, who has the largest scientifically verified unaugmented penis in the world. And you'll be surprised that some of the things we talked about and the issues he brought up were not what you would expect for somebody with the largest penis in the world. His introduction to the public sphere started when he joined a documentary called My Massive Cock. So how big is big? Well, his measures 14.4 inches long and 8.5 inches in girth. Now, to give you some context, there's really no definition for the term megaphallus or megapenis, but there is the term micropenis, and that's less than about 2.9 inches in length, which is only 0.14% of the population. And if you take the average penile length, that's somewhere between 5.2 and 5.8 inches. So when you look at population-based studies, you take an average and you take standard deviations. And based on a bell curve, when you go 2 standard deviations above the average, you're going to get about 2.5% of the population that are above that length. And so that number, depending on the data set you use, is between 7 and 7.9 inches, meaning that not only is he one of the largest men in the world, but there's probably very few men, even in the vicinity of his length. Like I said, only 2.5% of men will be above 8 inches or 7 or 8 inches. Interestingly, while I was researching for this podcast episode, I found a calculator that allows you to insert your length and your girth and figure out where you stand in terms of averages. Now, I don't encourage people to do this, but if you are finding yourself really stressed about this, I think it actually would make you feel a lot better, because most people are going to fall in average. And it can be very reassuring to you if you're worried about it and you're actually above average or significantly above average, but don't really realize it because there's so much misinformation about what actual penile length really is. I'll put the link in the show notes and the description below. So if you decide to look at it, feel free. So when I asked Matt who he was, he replied by telling me this.
I think, ironically, I don't have the big dick energy that you kind of associate with it. I'm always always been a bit shy. I think maybe partly to compensate for this.
And he went on to tell me why he decided to volunteer for this documentary in the first place.
I went on this, I applied. I didn't think I'd want to actually go on the show, but I wanted to give my advice about, what, from my perspective, because I saw the finished product and there were a lot of people on there. I think I was the only person who wasn't promoting OnlyFans at the end of it. So I think there's obviously certain agendas that come into play when you are talking about genitalia from the aspect of pornography. You have to present a certain image. You've got to be like really, manly and sexualized and all those sorts of things. And I'm just like, I'm just me.
Now, one would think that walking around with 14 inches give or take of penile length would give you a ton of self-confidence. But interestingly, that's not what Matt said.
It's like you almost find it harder to relate. It's those things that make you more alien and more judged differently because you don't have that in common, even if you are. It's sort of theoretically a better situation to be in. People do think of large, that 2.5% in the megaphallus range, or even if it's not an unofficial kind of term, that's still, we're talking like 8 inches, maybe 9 at sort of the high end of that. And you start to get problems, I think, certainly from I can imagine around that point.
Are you sick of going to the doctor only to have them talk at you for 15 minutes and leave without knowing exactly why they're prescribing you this certain medication and what exactly the next step is to take to optimize your health? Wouldn't it be great to finally find a doctor who actually listens to you, answers your questions, and doesn't rush you out the door? Well, at my practice, Rena Malik, MD, I aim to do just that. I specialize in taking care of patients who have issues with their sex lives, issues with their bladder, with their hormone health, or are having pain in their pelvic region or with sex. My goal is to give you the time and attention you deserve so you can leave with a clear understanding of your condition as well as our treatment plan that's optimized for your goals. During your visit, I'm 100% present with you for an entire hour. And after you leave, you can reach me. It is super easy to send me a message through our secure portal, and I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. No questions asked, no hidden fees. Scheduling is easy. Just visit our website, renamalikmd.com/appointments. We see patients in both Irvine and Beverly Hills, California, and I see patients virtually in California, Florida, Illinois, Maryland, New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. Oh, and don't forget Texas. If you're outside these states, consider seeing me for an educational visit. I look forward to seeing you. He started noticing that his penis was actually larger than average when he was in the school gym showers, and others started noticing too. And word spread quickly, which wasn't necessarily a good thing.
It was very strange because I think I grew physically more than faster than I grew mentally in some ways in terms of puberty. I wasn't particularly thinking about sex in the way that my body clearly was in some ways, but I hadn't really adjusted to those things. And particularly as the fairly shy, nervous kid, to be thrust into that deep end of a lot of attention was, like I say, some treatment, which now you would call sexual abuse, which I didn't really understand at the time because I think, again, you didn't think it was a thing that happened to men. And it was just that kind of stuff that you get attention. And obviously there's some men out there who are like, oh, wow, amazing. I'd love to get that reputation and stuff like that. But it comes with a lot of drawbacks as well.
When he did eventually have sex for the first time, it didn't really go exactly like he had hoped.
The first time I was sort of thought to have had sex, it was kind of bizarre because there was a girl in school who was like, oh, we want to, she was interested. We tried and we realized it was kind of impractical, so it didn't really happen. But we spread the rumor that we had because she wanted it more of a status thing, say, look what I've done, etc., etc. That was kind of supposedly my first time, but it wasn't really because it wasn't physically possible. So it wasn't until a lot later that I ended up actually having what I consider to be penetrative sex, and it was not good. Went to the hospital, so not ideal.
Yeah, and I'm guessing this is because if you think of average vaginal length, unaroused is like 3 to 3.5 inches. That can sometimes up to double in size, but even that won't accommodate your phallic length. So tell me how you approach that with a partner. Do you tell them? Do you prepare them? Do you use some aids in the bedroom?
Well, a mix of all three, like 3 or 4, I can't remember. I lost count, but a mix of different ways. I think obviously the first time I did it, I didn't really know what I was doing. I think like a lot of men, the first time certainly was not good. And I think the fact I've had to work so much to ensure that doesn't happen again has made me much more conscious lover of those elements. So I do always obviously try to bring it up where I can, not in a creepy way. It's the question of how do you have that conversation early enough in a relationship, if when you've already got a bit of a bond and it's kind of clear you can talk about sex. It's not creepy to do. I think that's key where you can, just because for both sakes it's very useful just to have that as a barometer of kind of what to expect, rather than springing it on them very last minute, because it's a lot to handle. You have to start making those conversations, having them early, even if they are a bit awkward. Though I'm a lot better at dropping that in subtly now than I was back in the day. In terms of actual performance, I think it's again, foreplay is obviously king in this situation, and accepting obviously penetrative sex is not the be all end all of sometimes it might not happen, and that's that's fine. It's just not necessarily, you can give each other a good time without necessarily relying on the conventional like PIV intercourse.
Even finding condoms to have safe sex was a challenge.
When I was younger, I got the biggest I could back then. See the TikToks of someone saying, there's any size can wear a condom because they'll put it around their leg or their head and say, look how big it goes. But obviously, that level of pressure, you're not going to maintain an erection, and it's much more likely to rip if you're going to move during that. So you do need to find stuff that suits you. So I was actually part of a University of Virginia, which was doing custom condoms like back in the day, which became They Fit, and now My One. And they do like the best range of custom, not a sponsor, but best range of custom condoms in terms of, I think the best they do even then though is, I think it's 9.5 inches, I think is that, which is obviously generally enough to cover what you're actually going to be penetrating with. I think sometimes people do complain too much about that because you can get used to it. I had to do a bit of practice, I suppose, on my own just to like keep your erection while having one on, because it can obviously be for a lot of men, it can be a turn off, regardless of your size, which is very difficult for you to deal with. So it's something you have to like prepare your body for, I suppose.
Now, in fact, he even describes getting bullied at a young age and being sort of objectified because of his large penis, leading to him actually wishing that he had a smaller penis and even looking for options for reduction surgery.
In the documentary, there was a couple instances of sort of, as you mentioned, sort of sexual assault or bullying, where one person sort of kept really trying to get you to have an erection in public, and another had you use a penis pump before going out to sort of have an erection that was visible. Can you talk about what that was like for you?
Yeah, both those instances when I was quite young as well. Like I was I was still growing at that point, because that pump I think would have been, it wouldn't fit now. But that was back in, I think it would have been 19 for that one. And the other instance was in school. Again, it's that kind of attention that you don't want. People think about it because they think, in a dream world, it's going to be, a bomb. Your crush has these things to you and you love it, being objectified. But that's because I think, obviously a lot of men don't get attention, if that makes sense. There's, the loneliness epidemic, whatever you want to call it. I think there's almost the reverse angle where they go like, wouldn't it be great if this happened to me, without thinking, oh no, it's the consequence. Like a lot of the comments on the documentary were from women saying, well, we deal with this all the time. We deal with being objectified. And obviously that's a completely valid point as well. It's not, I agree with their comments, but it's very strange from my perspective, you as a very average looking man to have that element about me, which is objectified, because it's not talked about very much as a topic, and people do think of it as being such a positive thing, when realistically, it comes with those drawbacks.
It could definitely take a mental toll. And I will say, like, I went to medical school in New York City, and I would talk to men who would tell me they're groped all the time in the subway or, public transportation, on the bus, because it's very busy. And, they can't say, they wouldn't feel comfortable saying anything or speaking up, but it didn't necessarily make them feel desired or good. Just like a woman getting, felt up doesn't feel good or desirable when it's by a stranger. Do you feel like you've experienced more of that than the average guy?
I think so. I think, like I say, even at my best, I was kind of average looking, so I probably missed the worst of it from that point of view. But there's certainly, like I say, I try and dress to the degree where it's not too visible. But there's certain days, for example, I pop to the shops because I'm lazy. I've got a cold or a headache or a hangover or something. I need something, and I'm not as dressed as I might have been. It might be a bit more pronounced than usual, and that's the sort of time where you're not thinking about it, and then you might have people touch you. Again, that's men and women, obviously, heterosexual. So it's definitely stranger to get that kind of male attention as well when that you're not personally interested in that.
Do you feel like it's ever affected your mental health at all? Have you ever wished that things were different?
Yeah, obviously, I've definitely thought things were different. I've looked into reductions, both surgically and any other kind of medical methods. I tried hypnosis, obviously, which was very unlikely, but thought it was worth the effort. I've tried some different medications, which thought, some estrogen-based things like finasteride and what's it called, Puraria and things, wild yam, some of those. So supplements, which are supposed to have some sort of reductive effect, and they seem to have the opposite. So nothing seemed to really work, unfortunately. I kind of got to that point where it is like, if there was an easy way to do it, I almost certainly would. But it's not an easy thing to change. So you're kind of stuck with who you are, and you have to kind of deal with it. And, there's definitely been periods, certainly in those kind of droughts where I've not been particularly interested in sex. That's when I've kind of especially thought it even more. Because at least there's an excitement factor, certainly, during when you are in the bedroom or whatever, or even in the gym showers. There's a certain moment where you can, like, at least get some enjoyment out of it. I'm not going to deny that. And I think any man who is big probably goes through a phase where they are, showing off a little bit more or a bit more arrogant, or they have some element, because it's in their head, it's like part of who you are, and you think, I have this thing, it's different, and it gets attention. But then, most people, and you should grow out of it, realistically, it shouldn't be something that you define yourself by, which, you could say it's hypocritical that I'm on here talking about my issue with that, but that's not the same as me, going around in tight pants to get stares. It's more like these are the issues that you wouldn't get without, from that immediate wow factor of it. So.
Quick break from this episode to let you know I am so grateful that you're spending part of your day with me. I started creating content online to empower people to learn more about their bodies without needing to go see a doctor, pay a copay, wait in a waiting room, or find parking. And it has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. If you want to help support our mission of providing free education, please consider joining our premium membership. There you will have access to ad-free episodes, which are released early, as well as free transcripts and the opportunity to ask me anything. And these questions are answered in our monthly AMA episodes. Support the show and join today at renamalik.supercast.com. Can't wait to see you there. Now, when Matt ultimately does find a partner that he wants to have sex with, shockingly, it's not always a resounding yes. And yeah, absolutely, a small percentage of women obviously fetishize his penis size, but the average woman
is more of a problem than it is a benefit. It's not like they're excited by it. It's often more, and even if they are excited by it, which, let's say a greater percentage is not necessarily their main thing, but they can get into it. That's still, I'd say, certainly less than half, probably more like 20% at most, who respond, I'd say, very positively. Certainly at least 30% hard nose from there. So you have to be prepared for that. I think it's, again, you get a thicker skin. It's quite weird to get to that point in a relationship and then get rejected. I think realistically, that's kind of difficult. You kind of have to develop that, because normally, that's when things are going really well, and you might have bad sex afterwards and then it ends. But it's very rare it happens just that moment before sex. So it's very strange to kind of deal with that. Certainly, it was always kind of challenging, particularly because I grew up in the era of the lad mags and that kind of culture, where it was seen as, bigger is better. So when I had those reactions from women, so I was like, what's going wrong? Why do they not want me like this? Am I that awful? There's no way to know for sure, because even there's women who have mistaken ideas of what sizes are anyway, because they're either lied to by men or they just misjudge it themselves. And it's not like a blame thing. It's just a case of, I think, culturally, because obviously dildos are, the way dildo sizes work, obviously they include the non-insertable bits as well. So they might think they want a larger size, but realistically, if only 7 inches of a 10-inch dildo is insertable, it's really more like 7 inches. So, and they'd say, oh, if it's 10 inches, that's what I want from a man. And it's not, may not be the case.
Yeah, there are studies actually to look at what type of toys women buy, and the large majority buy 6 inches, which is the entire length, and so less is insertable. And so the large majority of women, when you can buy huge dildos, are buying average size dildos. So that's sort of interesting, I think, in general. Do you feel like there's an expectation that you have to be really good in bed? Like, do women sort of expect that, because you're so well endowed, you must have had many partners and you must be really well experienced?
I think that's less of an issue. If they've seen porn or whatever miss they've taken from porn, I think they assume it's going to be simple. I'd like to think I'm quite good in bed, but again, it's a question of, it's not easy. It's not, if you watch a porn film, it's just obviously everyone fits and everyone's, it's all perfect. And obviously it's not in real life, regardless of what size you are. Even if you're the same size as the people in the porn film, that's a very staged production with fluffers to get everyone ready, with the right angles to make things look bigger. So when you're doing it in real life, obviously, in my case, it takes quite a while to get aroused, typically, especially if I'm starting from kind of fresh, shall we say. And it's a lot of work, from their point of view. Obviously, it's very strenuous. It's not, you can't have a quickie, I'd say. You have to kind of go into it, and it's always, without being too crass, it's a bit, more like fisting to a degree than it is like conventional vaginal sex. So it is a different type of thing. And some women love that. Obviously, some are not prepared for it at all. And some absolutely don't like it. So you got to be prepared for that and not try and force those expectations down people, because that's not, everyone has their own preferences.
Sometimes it's too painful for his partners, and he has to use buffers to limit the length with which he penetrates.
Interesting. I want to share this with you. There was a case report in 2006 that talked about a historical treatment that was derived for a woman who was having painful sexual intercourse with her husband who was well endowed. And it was essentially like a buffer. And now we have devices like ONUT, which we're not sponsored by or anything, but they can sort of limit the amount of penetration so that it's not uncomfortable. And have you had a lot of experience where it's painful for women, or have you had to sort of figure out the right positions that work better for the majority of women when you're having penetrative intercourse?
Yeah, I've used ONUTs before. I've kind of used my own custom solutions as well to try and replicate the effect, but slightly larger buffer. Even just using pillows has occasionally been, when we don't have anything else to hand, has been effective, certainly in like their bedroom. Ultimately, I think it's a lot of experimentation is sort of what's got me to this point where I know now I can be aware of what might work, what might not work. I don't think there's like, again, one size fits all in terms of as a solution that's going to make it super comfortable for everyone, because I think there are some women for which, penetrative sex is kind of off the table. And there's some where it is, but you have to be very careful. And there's some who are a bit more experimental. And partly that is, the mental, state of mind as well, in terms of how much you're willing to, try that kind of stuff, which obviously varies on the partner, varies on the mood. But yeah, I've tried a lot of different ones. There's some that work, some that don't.
Now, you may think that an erection is even more exciting when you have a larger phallus, but Matt describes something a little different.
It doesn't go all the way up like a lot of penises would in that situation, because it's the weight of it and everything. So even on a good day, it's not standing to attention the same way that the average one does. So that does get fully hard. It just takes quite a long time.
That's important to mention because a lot of people don't realize that when you have an erection, right, you increase your blood flow to that area on the order of 3 times more magnitude of millimeters of mercury of pressure. And so you're getting a large volume of blood pushing into those tissues, and you have longer tissues. So it's going to be a lot more blood flow going in, but it's also going to take a lot more sort of a physiologic burden to fill the corpora cavernosa, or those spongy erectile tissue. And the fact that you say, it doesn't get not fully erect, but doesn't get fully up because it's so heavy, that's an important part for people to realize, that erections are different, right? Erections are variable, and one person's erection is not going to look like someone else's, and especially not like what you see on pornography necessarily. Have you yourself dealt with difficulties with erections?
Yes, yeah. I mean, certainly again, I'm 40s now, so I'm starting to. It takes more time. And then there are situations where it's not happened. I think like a lot of men, it happens sometimes. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's people's unwillingness to kind of confront these issues is part of the problem, especially if they're on the larger size. They're more likely to perpetuate those kind of myths, like, oh no, it's always really, really easy to get aroused and stuff like that. But like, I've always been capable of it. And I don't think I've ever had a period where I couldn't for a really long time. But there's been certain encounters certainly where it's not worked because of me. I think that's fair to own up to.
And in terms of, experiencing pleasure, do you feel like there's been any variation between your ability to experience pleasure versus that of an average size person?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so when it comes to oral, it's very different when you can't really have a blowjob, a conventional blowjob. It's going to be, you can have vague oral, but it's not something that, unless you can unhinge your jaw, it's not going to be able to manage that. So you're missing out on those kind of things, and obviously the feeling of being able to be fully inside someone, you don't get that either. So you're missing out on a few areas there. But again, it's very difficult to judge, because people sometimes will ask the question of like, oh, how does it feel? But I don't know the difference of how it's very hard to judge. Like, I want to say it feels better because there's more of me to have those kind of pleasure sensors, or whatever you want to call them, in the tissue. But I don't know how a normal person feels in that point of view. So it could be proportionate. It could be exponentially better. I don't know. It's definitely, like I say, a very different situation for me from that perspective.
Another common misconception is that Matt has a very high sex drive. In fact, he describes himself as having actually a relatively low sex drive.
I've always been in a situation kind of described as a bit of a sexual camel in terms of my interest, in terms of I get very active and then sort of store it away and then don't think about sex for a long time, and then go into it again, as opposed to it being, people always think, oh, you're always big, it's always on your mind. But obviously it's not. It's just the same as having a normal sized penis. It's bigger. So when you see a big penis, you only see it in porn, or you see it in a sexual context. It's the same as seeing a 3-inch penis on a normal scale or something like that.
And he emphasizes how his penis size fluctuates, and that depends on the level of arousal, the room temperature, and a variety of different factors. So much so that his measurements, even between the 2 times he got measured for research studies, varied by almost 2 to 2.5 inches. And because of this, he's really surprised that people can even proudly say that they are a certain size because it varies so much.
I think their size they give is their best ever amazing size and go around, but it's more important to say it does change. It's not like you're always going to be on top form. It's a bit silly to do that, and I didn't want to be saying that impression out every time I get aroused. It's like this exact same thing you could guarantee, or to make people feel, if I don't get like that, they think it's like their problem or like they're doing something wrong as well.
How does he cope with the unwanted attention at times? Well, he's learned to dress himself to essentially hide his bulge.
I can always hide it, even at my size. You can hide it. It just takes a lot more work. You've got to dress accordingly.
Right.
You can't just buy off the rack things, expect them to fit. You can't buy tight jeans because they're in style and think that's going to work for me. If you do wear, cycling short type compression pants, baggier clothes in general, buy a size up, buy long shirts. If you are working out, then have shirts have multiple pairs of shorts, I guess, or one pair underneath, one pair over it to kind of cover the bulge.
Are you feeling in a rut in the bedroom, wishing you had the kind of sex life you could brag about? I've spent years helping patients and creating content for people all around the world to improve and optimize their sex life. Today, you can get my knowledge for 100% free with my new ebook called Better Sex, Better Life. In this ebook, I review my top 10 tips for improving your sex life, all from the comfort of your own home. All you have to do is go to renamalikmd.com/morepleasure to download it for free today. And sometimes he even finds himself avoiding certain social situations.
So I went to a gym and had a bit of an unfortunate experience there. So I work out at home. I've got my own treadmill and everything, so I can at least do that without the attention of people. I don't know, if I was running around the block, I'd be kind of scared if what happened if it's a bit more visible than I expected it to be, because you often can't predict as well. Again, if you do get not even fully aroused, but just a bit more blood down there, it can be quite a lot larger and a lot more noticeable, especially if you're wearing new workout gear or something. It's going to be something you've got to be prepared for. I think what I always find better is I'm more comfortable on holiday. So I've been to a nude beach abroad and stuff. I'd never do it over here because it feels like it's kind of more freeing. You don't have that. Even if you get reactions, they kind of just feel like different reactions. It doesn't feel like part of your daily life. Whereas the judgment from people on the street in the UK, that always feels like that's going to be more of a, I don't know, it feels like it personally kind of, it's more wounding, I suppose. So yeah, you do have that aspect.
Yeah.
A lot of it, like I say, it's not so much stuff you can't do, it's stuff you're self-conscious about doing. And that's the same with dressing, same with sex, same with a lot of other elements. It's just these extra burdens. I don't want to be, poor little rich girl style complaining about a problem like this, but it gives you more to think about, realistically, the bigger you are, because you have those kind of extra concerns of what will they think about it, how will they handle it, all these points before a date. I've certainly had dates before where I've just been too neurotic, and it's been absolutely my fault. I've just been a bad date because I've had this back of my head. I've been thinking, what have I done? All these problems that could come out.
Right. So it's not as simple as it seems, right? Whereas I think someone who is in the average spectrum will not be, they obviously may have preoccupations and concerns about their size, but ultimately they don't have to navigate these sort of challenges of maybe discussing it with their partner so openly and then navigating how to even do the act with the partner.
Exactly. So people obviously of any size can have issues based on it mentally, or from trauma from past partners or experiences based on that. But I think in terms of those practical situations that I have to go through with every partner, that's where it becomes particularly, it's almost like a checklist, which I guess at this point it means that, I've reached the age now where I'm kind of used to it. But certainly navigating that when I was younger is very difficult, especially, like I say, as someone who doesn't have the riz, as the kids say. It's very difficult to kind of be going around and I'm not a natural flirt or anything, so I couldn't really, it was a difficult topic to bring up without torpedoing a relationship or something, or a date like that. And I think obviously there were situations where I think I was kind of spoiled. It's a bit like, pretty privileged to a degree, where I had a lot of women sort of not really throwing stuff at me, but I had a lot of attention from women, should we say, that I wouldn't have had if I was regular. And then it kind of skewed my perspective of like, how do I actually start relationships? It's like, how do I don't know how to do the courtship things, of like, those sort of things. I was a bit complacent.
But of course, it's not all bad. He did have his fair share of attention from women while he was growing up.
I think one of the main messages I'm trying to sort of make in any of the interviews I've done is that ultimately, no matter what size it is, it's only going to affect a very small portion of your life in general, because it is just, it's there hidden away most of the times. And obviously, if it's really big or really small, you're going to have much of an impact because of it. But ultimately, it's shouldn't define who you are or those elements. So any complaints you do have, you're going to have to knuckle down and get on with.
Unfortunately, he didn't have any major traumatic experiences seeing doctors, although enrolling in research studies to measure his penis size was a bit on the awkward side.
Even stranger going like to be part of any kind of study. Like, it's very strange. I've never done that before. Like, it's very obviously going to the doctors normally, you might have to take off your clothes or whatever, or be in underwear or whatever, but that's fine. You're doing it for that stuff. It's when you're going there to be measured. It's a very strange feeling, for any man to do. I think that certainly is where it becomes very unusual. So in terms of awkwardness, that was definitely the most awkward thing. I think doing it for the TV cameras, especially at the first, was even weirder. So I think those elements have been a lot weirder than the regular, shall we say, the regular doctor's appearances that I've had.
And we ended off with his top tips for men who might be struggling with a larger penis. But I would venture that anyone with an issue with penile size could benefit from most of these tips.
Talk to guys who are above average, well endowed, who may struggle with some of the same things, not maybe to the same degree, but what are maybe your top 5 tips for those guys?
Top 5 tips. I think first of all, it's obviously don't let it be your identity. Don't let it consume who you are. You got to be. Oh, and number 2 is be aware of what you have. I think they're the 2 very different things. Like, you can't have that be part of your personality to a degree, but you've got to know the issues you're having, because otherwise you're going to hurt people. You're going to just be a bad lover as well. I think number 3 is be very aware of your partner and accept that some women or men, or whatever your preference is, aren't going to be into that, either from a practical point of view or just psychologically. You have to kind of accept that's something you can't do. And before, I'd say invest in suitable clothing, make the effort to dress accordingly, have certain outfits that are very baggy to prepare for those things, and then don't complain when you can't fit into the latest skinny jeans. And number 5, I think just be a better lover. Look at all these other ways you can out there, know your body, know what it can do. Don't rely on kind of the porn myths or the porn expectations of you should be always ready for action, you should always be turned on, you always be aroused. It's just you are who you are. Don't let that image affect you.
Yeah, and I think I would add one is communicate. You've mentioned that a lot, and I think communicate with your partner early as you feel comfortable, and let them know that you may have to do some experimentation to figure out what's most comfortable and pleasurable and enjoyable. I think it's important to communicate about sex, no matter what size you are, but I think that it's a great tool to have in your toolbox, and also just find out what they're into, whether if it's outside of penetrative sex as well, so you have those things in your toolbox.
Absolutely. I think the key is, like I say, in some times it might not work, but a lot of time it's just like what works for you, what works for them, and trying to get that happy medium within there. And hopefully you'll have a good evening or day, or whenever you want to do whatever you want to get up to.
And we ended off with him telling us about his upcoming book.
So you have a book coming out in next year.
Yes.
Which is a memoir. What prompted you to come out in the public sphere and then also write the book?
Well, like I say, I was on the documentary in 2022, and people were that was only kind of like I say, they shrunk me to a degree, because they didn't want one person to be bigger than the rest, and to a degree. So everyone was 9'5" to 10'5" on the show, or reportedly that, whether they were smaller than that on the show or bigger than that, because that's the range they wanted to look at for the documentary. It was more like an overview of different points and sort of edited that way. But people were curious. People reached out from that, and people said, "Oh, you should write about your experiences." And I've had the opportunity. So I've worked with a company called Fleshy as well to speak about sort of men's issues and the need to be aware of men's bodies and talk about these problems, because they do a range of toys and I wouldn't fit into any of them, which is a problem. It's a very minor problem in the scale of these things, but it's like you have to be aware of these things, be more open about the problems that are out there, so the conversation is not dominated by the porn myths or creepy guys on Reddit or whatever like that. It's all the fantasists. It's more like this is an actual issue, and there's issues that aren't being looked at. So it's partly my story, and it's got a bunch of wacky anecdotes and saucy bits, as well as some more serious and dramatic moments, tied along with kind of the cultural history of the penis in the media from sort of the 80s to present day, in terms of back then there's a very kind of phallocentric culture, and like I say, that was the source of pleasure, was the penis, and that's the way it was done. It was all, a lot of the media was obviously controlled by men as well, so that was what they wanted. And then as sort of there was a bit more of a female revolution, if you want to call it that, in media and Sex and the City, all these kind of things, you have different perspectives that come out, and you think, oh, maybe that's not true. And like what was the standardized porn industry kind of collapsed in a lot of ways and became democratized by OnlyFans or whatever we have nowadays. And you can see there's a lot more to it than just your standard muscly white dude with a large dong. It's not like that. It's all about that.
I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation with Matt Barr. If you did, please make sure to follow this podcast and share a screenshot of this podcast or this YouTube video on your social media and tag me so I know that you're watching and listening, and let me know what the most interesting podcast you've listened to on my channel has been. And as always, remember to take care of yourself because you're worth it.